Wendy Day has always been a helper, first to her family, then to a generation of artists. When she saw creators in a rising music movement being exploited, she stepped in, cut historic deals, and changed the financial future of the industry forever.
I come from very humble background. I was born and raised outside of Philadelphia, and my family, we were kind of poor. So for me, in the 80s, making money was it. I come from the era where the slogan was, whoever has the most toys when they die wins. So that was kind of my goal in coming out of art school in Philly, because I went to New York for a weekend and heard the Mr. Magic Marley Marl radio show. And I fell in love with their charisma, and I fell in love with the music all over again. I went back to Philadelphia, quit my job, loaded up a U-Haul, and I was living in New York within a week. No job. I was in a sublet because I had no place to live, didn't know anybody in the city, but I knew that that was where I had to be. I knew that's where I wanted to be. I ended up moving to Montreal to work for a liquor company, and I was making great money and I loved it until I didn't anymore. And I moved back to New York in 1991 and started taking classes, because that's what I always did when I didn't know what to do next. And I was just kind of living the life, having fun. It was the first time in my life where I didn't have to work for a living. I had money that was gifted to me from the company that I built in Montreal when it sold. And I took a class at the New School that was taught by an accountant to the stars. His name was Bert Padell. And I learned how unfairly oppressed artists were, especially Black artists. And I wanted to do something to help. And I decided that I wanted to do something to give back for all of the happiness that the music brought me, you know, in the 12 years that I had been listening to it. So I decided to start Rap Coalition. Who better than me to give back to the artists that brought us great music? I put together a blueprint for the company that I wanted to start. I put together a business plan. I incorporated or started the incorporation process for a 501c3 for Rap Coalition. I went to meet with Bert Padell one morning, very early. He was on the treadmill. It was probably 6:30 or 7 a.m., which is really early for me, even today. And I explained to him what I wanted to do. He thought I was crazy. He thought that I should invest the money with him and never have to work another day in my life, which it wasn't that much money. I didn't know that at the time. But I started Rap Coalition, and I never looked back. The money ran out after about a year and a half. But the great thing is, it put me in position to really help rap artists and make a difference in their lives. And then I met Master P, and I started working with one of the guys in his company. He was the cousin of an artist that I had pulled off of Island Records, and I got to help him with his landmark deal with Priority Records. And that was the first deal that I was ever a part of. And it was a really great deal to have as my first. And it just put me in position to help other artists that had leverage get deals, ownership deals in the music industry. And I started setting precedent. Eminem was a white rapper that I ran into outside of a music conference in Detroit at the Athenaeum Hotel. I was there with a rapper called Rhymefest from Chicago. Rhymefest is the rapper who wrote Jesus Walks for Kanye. Super, super talented artist. He was up and coming at the time. Nobody knew who he was. Nobody knew who Eminem was. He was just a guy rapping outside of a convention. And I was not interested in hearing him rap. I was interested in going to Denny's to get something to eat. Rhymefest and I had driven from Chicago. We hadn't eaten. I hadn't eaten since the night before. I was starving. It was around 5 or 6 in the afternoon. And Rhymefest wanted me to listen to the demo tape. I had no interest. Rhymefest peer pressured me into listening to it. I was driving to Denny's. He was in the passenger seat. He did the full turnaround to look at me and stare at me until I finally said, "Pop it in, let's listen to it." And it was so good, I made a U-turn and went back to the hotel and scooped Eminem up and said, "We're going to Denny's, we're going to get some food, and I'm going to teach you guys about publishing. We're going to talk about how the music industry works." So I befriended M. I got to speak to his manager at the time, who was a guy named Mark. He had a magazine out of Detroit. I met his attorney, who had just gotten out of law school or was just about to graduate law school, Paul Rosenberg, who is today M's manager. And I got to know his whole camp and his whole family, for lack of a better term. I tried shopping him a deal. I knew all the heads of the labels, and I decided that I would pitch Eminem to them because he was so talented, and nobody wanted to sign a white rapper. It was very difficult back then to be diverse in the rap music industry, for myself included, but especially for artists. And I ended up doing an event called Rap Olympics that showcased him and a bunch of other talent. He was one of the reasons I did it. It wasn't the only reason I did Rap Olympics. That was how Eminem got noticed. Aside from Jimmy Iovine's nephew being in the crowd and getting his demo, which is funny because I had sent Jimmy the demo twice. I had FedExed it twice. I knew it was received by his office because he signed. But anyway, his nephew D brought the cassette to Jimmy. At the same time, my team had come in second at Rap Olympics. Jay Smooth's team, Project Blowed, had come in first. And part of the prize for those who came in second was they got to be featured on the Wake Up Show, Sway and Tech's Wake Up Show. And Dr. Dre had tuned in to the Wake Up Show, and he heard Eminem rapping and called Sway and said, "Yo, who's rapping? I need to know who that is." And he signed him like on the spot, which was really kind of incredible.
Cash Money Records taking over for the 99 in the 2000s.
I was shopping at a store called Peaches in New Orleans, and I found a CD by a guy named Pimp Daddy, and I flipped it over, and I saw the Cash Money logo, and I spent I was there, again, another music conference. I was there for the conference, but I spent my 3 days there looking for Cash Money. I went into the Calliope projects, I went into the Magnolia projects, and it's funny because being a white person looking for young black folk, I'm sure they thought I was either a federal agent or a social worker, because they're pretty much the only white women that would go into the hood. I didn't find them on that trip. I was actually connected into them a few months later by a street team guy out of Houston, Texas, who put me on the phone with them. And then I started shopping a deal for them. I wrote a business plan. We made them look like IBM. We made them look like a super corporate entity so that they could get the kind of deal that they deserved. And 9 months later, they received an amazing deal with Universal. Just to give you a comparison, the first offer came from Neil Levine at Penalty Records. It was for $75,000 for Juvenile. That was in August of '97. And then we kept putting out music, getting them up above the 25,000 units that they were selling when I met them. I helped them put out an album and get it to 75,000 pretty quickly, and a bidding war ensued. And by March of '98, they were looking at a $30 million distribution deal. It was an 80-20 split, and it was for 6 artists over a 3-year period. And if they wanted to leave after 3 years, they could, and they could take the masters with them, which was unheard of in music or rap music at that point in time. So it was kind of a landmark deal, and I'm known for that. That's probably, it's not my personal favorite, but it seems to be other people's personal favorite. So when you ask me my favorite deal, I can't exclude that. So I started Rap Coalition because I saw that artists needed to be educated. I was pulling artists out of bad deals, but what's better is educating artists so that they don't get into a bad deal, right? So the contracts were the main problem. So the artists were making 15% roughly of the income. The labels are making 85%, but the artists were recouping what was spent to get them to the level of success that they were achieving out of their 15%. So that money wasn't coming off the top. They were paying back. If $1 million was being spent to record and then market and promote them, they were paying back that $1 million out of their 15% share. So what that meant was that most artists, almost all, were not recouping their money. So they were only making money from their shows. They weren't really making any money from the record label side of it. You know, a lot of what I went through in the music business has definitely bled over into my personal relationships. When I first got into the music industry, I started wearing baggy clothes and I started wearing Timberlands. I loved my cross-colored jeans. I would wear Timberlands, and I became as non-feminine as possible. I started pulling my hair back into a ponytail. In fact, today when you see me at work, I have a ponytail. You know, I haven't changed my image in the music industry in 32 years. I've developed this hard shell that it's very difficult to pierce. It's very hard for me to be vulnerable and discuss emotions. And that comes from, 30 years of just putting up a wall and putting up this hard front so that men would stop hitting on me and start treating me as an equal and stop sexualizing, the fact that I'm female in the music industry. It was always very difficult. I gained 30 pounds immediately to stop guys from hitting. It didn't stop anything, but I felt like it would, And it's, in a way, it's sad that that's what I had to do, but it definitely impacted who I became and how I was perceived in the music industry. On a happy note, at 62 years old, I've just lost 80 pounds in the past 10 months because I realized that my health was being impacted by some of the choices that I was making. I've always been a passionate, caring person. I've always been the helper. That was my role in school. That was my role in family. That's my role with my friends. It's what I do for a living. But it's my passion. It wasn't like I woke up one day and said, gee, I think I'll start helping people because that sounds like a fun job. I started helping people as a child because it brought me joy. And I'm very fortunate because I really love what I do. I have the best job. I get to really help people and make differences in many lives. I've built so many millionaires in the music business. I've gotten to help people get out of the struggle and get their families and their friends out of really bad situations. And that's what drives me. So if you can figure out what makes you happy and do it, and then figure out a way to monetize it, there's nothing better. There's nothing in life that I can recommend beyond being happy.